Aloha and welcome to this presentation of the Vegan Society of Hawaii. We're so happy and proud today to have with us Jill Nussinow, MS, RDN, is also known as the Veggie Queen. She is an international speaker on health and wellness, the author of 4 cookbooks, who taught for the McDougall program for 20 years, and also as an adjunct instructor for 30 years in the culinary arts at Santa Rosa Junior College. She has a special place in my own culinary history because the first cookbook I ever read on pressure cooking, and which I consulted many times, by the way, was her 2016 book, Vegan Under Pressure. Her presentation today is entitled, Jazz Up Your Cooking and Boost Your Health with Herbs and Spices. Aloha.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Jill.
Thank you for having me. 2 things. One, I've never been double laid at an event, so this is pretty special. And it's my honor to be here. I'm really happy to be here. So this is black pepper, and I just listened to the most fascinating book about the edible history of the world. And there is such history with black pepper. It was used in the BC, in like 1000 BC. It's the most used spice in the US, and it is also the most used spice anywhere in the world, and it was so expensive. And anybody remember, like 6th grade, they taught you about the explorers going around and, finding like the spices? And you think, why? What was that about? Well, these were very special things, the spices. And I used to think, until I heard this recently, that one of the reasons that they wanted the spices was because the food was spoiling and was putrid. And in this book, the guy who wrote it said, that's not true. Because if you could afford to have meat, which I'm not going to be talking about meat, but if at that time, if you could afford to have meat, you could afford these spices. And they just added to the flavor. And that was the interesting thing. And black pepper was the one spice, it was worth like 100 times any other thing at the time. But there's also, in addition to black peppercorns, there are white peppercorns, there are pink peppercorns, there are green peppercorns, and there's another kind of pepper called long pepper. And they're all kind of spicy. Does anybody use pepper? Okay, because it is the most used spice in the US. It is also the most used spice in India. And so it is actually good for you. There are things about it that are good for you, but also we have chilies, okay? And somebody was just talking about a chili that comes from Hawaii. I don't know what it's called, but I'm sure chilies grow amazingly well here. And they are also very popular, and they're hot. And the thing about chilies is, and you have to remember, not chili spice, but actual chili powder, because chili spice usually has other things in it, and sometimes it has salt in it. But chili powder, chilies contain something called capsicum and capsaicin, and capsaicin is very good for your metabolism. It actually speeds up your metabolism, which is really important. And anybody ever use a capsaicin rub on a part of you that may have been sore or needed a little attention? I have a theory about some of these rubs. The capsaicin, because it's hot, would bring more circulation to that area. But here's the interesting thing. If you took your hand and you rubbed it on your knee because your knee hurt, just doing that would help too. So sometimes you're giving a love to the part that really needs it, but the capsaicin will really help. I used to use this nasal spray that had capsaicin in it. It is amazing. I tell you, nothing will live in your nose if you put that stuff up there. It will kill every virus, every germ. It won't kill you, but it almost feels like it could happen. So the hot things are good for you. So what is a spice? And, there's difference between spices and herbs. The spice comes from roots, rhizomes, stems, leaves, bark, flowers, fruits, and seeds. Those are all the parts of the plant that can be a spice. And so there are many, many different parts of the plant that could be a spice that you could use. Herbs are usually the green part of a flowering plant. And here's the thing that's interesting about herbs. When I was on my way over here with Carol, who so very nicely gave me a ride, we were talking about cilantro. And we had a fairly in-depth conversation about cilantro. And Carol told me she used to hate it. And many people feel that way about, any cilantro haters in here? Yeah, nobody's raising their hand. Okay. Some of you are lying. It's all right. I get that. Maybe you don't want to say that you're a cilantro hater. Nobody wants to be a hater, right? You just I could live without it. I don't want it in my food. But it doesn't matter what it is. And here's the interesting thing nutritionally about these herbs, as well as the spices. They are so high in antioxidants and polyphenols and the things you need. I brought a book which I want to tell you about because this is my most nutrition-oriented book. It's called Nutrition Champs, and each letter stands for ingredients. It's cruciferous vegetables, herbs and spices, alliums, which are also lumped into herbs and spices, mushrooms, peas, beans, and lentils, and seeds and nuts. The herbs are really important, and I say one of my food rules, and I have very few, is when you eat something cooked, eat something raw. And that could just be the sprinkle of parsley on your food. It could be cilantro on the top. It could be tarragon if you love it. It could be basil. A lot of people love basil. And here's an important thing about your herbs. People want to know, does it matter if it's dried or it's fresh? And the answer is yes, it matters. But the important thing is when you use a dried herb, you use 1/3 the amount that you would use if it's fresh. So use 1 teaspoon dried or 1 tablespoon fresh, or any amount thereabouts. Now, do you add it at the beginning of cooking or do you add it at the end? Now, this really depends on what your goal is. So often at the beginning of cooking, I might add a little bit of a rosemary sprig to infuse the flavor into my food. And I wouldn't chop up rosemary and add it at the end because it's not really that tasty when you're chewing on those tough little needles. So I wouldn't add that at the end. But if you want to taste your basil or your parsley, add it at the end. When I cook with thyme, I have to admit I'm not a good gardener, okay? I grow things, but I'm what I call the accidental gardener. If it grows, it grows. If it doesn't grow, I don't have it. But I do grow herbs. I grow oregano, thyme, parsley, basil sometimes. I don't live in a good area for that. I have grown tarragon. Oh, I grow lemon balm, which is very easy and very good for you, very relaxing. So if I use my thyme, I will take a whole long sprig of thyme, I'll put it in my soup or stew, and I'll pull out the stem, and the leaves are in there. Then if I want a lot of thyme flavor, I will add usually dried thyme at the end. So there's different ways you can use your herbs to add flavor to your food. And it's not just I've had people say, oh, I made broth, it was terrible. I'm like, what'd you put in it? Well, I put 3 sprigs of rosemary in it. And they cooked it for a long time. I'm like, that's not going to work. So you have to think a little bit about, what am I doing to my food, and is it going to be the flavor I want? So if I add rosemary to a broth, I put in 1 little piece about this big. That's it. It can be overpowering. It's incredibly good for you, but overpowering. And you want your food to taste good. Now, one of the things about herbs is you can mix them. And you could mix, if you love, anybody love mint? Okay, do you love spearmint? Do you love peppermint? Do you love chocolate mint? Do you love cat mint? What mint do you love? Because there's a whole family of mint. So you have to decide which ones you love. But you can mix mint with basil, you can mix mint with parsley, you can mix mint with other things, or you can have it alone. You can dry it and make tea out of it. You can use it fresh for tea, as they do in Morocco. You can use, and mint is very soothing to your system. So you have to decide, do you want to use the thing alone? Like when I make pesto, I make it often with basil and also with parsley. And people are like, well, why do you do that? Well, there's two reasons. One is parsley helps make your breath better, and if you're making pesto with garlic in it, that may be useful. And the other reason is if I'm growing basil, I usually don't have a lot of it, and I may have a lot more parsley, and if I'm buying it, the parsley is way less expensive than the basil, so I'm going to mix them together. So it really depends, and there's no rules when it comes to that. If you like to mix your lemon balm and your mint and your parsley and sprinkle that all over your food, have fun. I'm not doing that, but you can if you want. So using spices, this is another thing. Do you use them whole? Do you use them ground? Do you grind them? Do you toast them? Or are they just as they are? How long do you store them? How do you store them? So let me go through this. So some things are better whole than ground. And some things that you're going to toast and then grind. Like one of my favorites is cumin. How many people like cumin? It kind of smells like dirty socks a little bit, but it's pretty good, So I like to toast it. And I took a class, and she showed us how to toast the cumin. It was so dark, I couldn't even believe it. I was like, oh, I never toast it that much. And you do it in a dry pan. No oil necessary. And here's the key. Don't put the pan on and go answer the door, walk the dog, don't do anything. Stand there with the pan because it's so easy to burn it, and you want to do it over medium-low heat, all right? Because that way you can pay attention. You can do it to your desired darkness, all right? And then what you do is you can keep it that way, and this is a really important point. Label it, okay? Toasted, not ground. And then you can grind it if you want. I usually have both. I have the toasted that I didn't grind, and the reason is once you grind it, the oils start turning. They don't turn that much once it's, browned or, so it's not a big deal, but you are going to lose some of those volatile oils. So I do some where I have it ground, and then I can add it to my food after it's been toasted. And I have some that's not toasted that I can toast right away. And I have some that's toasted and not ground. So you can do it any way that you want, but labeling is a really important part. And also on your label, you may want to put the date, because spices only last, ground spices especially, and this is kind of shocking, 6 months to a year. Okay, I'm going to tell you my nutmeg story. I live in California. I had a well-known chef give me a recipe, and he told me that I needed to grate fresh nutmeg on this recipe. And I thought, well, I hate nutmeg. Why am I going to put nutmeg on my food? But I thought, he gave me this recipe. So I went to the cooking store, and I went to my local co-op, and I got a nutmeg. I got a nutmeg grater, and you don't have to use a nutmeg grater. These days, you can use your favorite microplane grater. And I grated the nutmeg, and I tasted it, and I thought, I like nutmeg. Well, the only nutmeg I ever had was my mother's nutmeg, which must have been in her spice cabinet for 20 years. And all I was tasting was dust. So that's why I thought I hated nutmeg, all right? I really do like nutmeg. And nutmeg, if you've ever had one, they're very hard and they don't go bad. So like I could have one nutmeg maybe for like 6 months and, just keep grating it and it's fine. That is not something you toast. You just grate it into your food. You can do it before, after, it doesn't matter, but usually it's after to add some flavor. It is one of the spices that is in a pumpkin spice blend. And so nutmeg is really yummy. I want to talk about some of the other ones, and I want to talk about how to grind them. So how do you store them? Somewhere cool and dark. Okay, that's the best way to store them. So you don't want your spice cabinet over your stove, somewhere that's going to get warm. Sometimes people think, oh, the best way to store this is to put it in the freezer. Not necessarily, because it's kind of damp in there, so you don't really want that. And the main goal of using herbs and spices, or having them, is to use them. So it doesn't do any good to put it in the freezer and forget about it. Now, this is off topic, but how many people have a jar of miso in the back of their refrigerator? Lots of people. Because you put it in there, you're like, what am I going to do with this miso? Well, that will happen with whatever spice you put away in your refrigerator or your freezer. You will forget about it, and then you won't use it. So one of the things that usually will help with weevils is putting something in the freezer. It doesn't make the weevils go away. It just kind of lays them dormant. So often a weevil issue, this is really weird, but it will usually be in the spice you bought. So if it was in all of them, you had likely an infestation, but if it wasn't, so just put them away in a cabinet. Like I have a special spice cabinet, which doesn't hold all my spices, which is really sad. I really needed 2 or 3, but I didn't have enough spaces to do that with. But I use them, and I have to tell you, my husband is very organized, and he loves making labels. So he made labels and put them on the top of my spices, so when I look down, I can see which one I'm getting. And I have to tell you, you want to really pay attention to that, because the one time that I put the cinnamon on the pizza crust instead of the pizza spice blend, we had a different kind of pizza for dinner, and it was really funny. And then after that, my son kept saying, can you make that pizza again? And so I was just doing it by where it was in the spice rack, and I didn't look at the label. So always label so you know what you're grabbing, because they can get mixed up. And if you put chili on instead of cinnamon, you will be sorry. So 6 months to a year for your spices. Now, how to grind them? There's at least two ways you can do it. You can do it in a blender if you have enough spices. My favorite way is, well, there's 3 really, is a coffee grinder that is used only for spices, okay? Only for spices. And the third way is a spice grinder. There's a couple kinds. One is like a ceramic one, and you turn it. The other one is an actual spice grinder that's electric, like your coffee grinder. Now, when you do your spices in your coffee grinder, which is my spice grinder, don't make coffee in your with your coffee grinder if you're using it for spices, because it will contaminate, the coffee will contaminate your spices will contaminate the coffee. You don't want that. To clean your spice grinder, and it's really funny, there's one that I used to love, it was a Cuisinart. It had a removable bowl that could be washed. Now, I think that's kind of a brilliant idea, because the other ones have a stationary blade, and you can't really wash them. You can wipe them, but it's still really hard. What you do is you use white rice, because the oils from the spices will get picked up by the white rice. I don't eat white rice, but I have white rice specifically for that. Or the other thing you can do related is you can use white bread. those white things will help pull the oils out so that you don't, you're not contaminating whatever you're doing. Like, I don't want my cardamom to taste like cumin. I don't want to mix them together. So that's important. Here's the whole thing. How much do you use? How often? And is our desire for spices increasing? And the answer is definitely yes. In 1966, it was 1.2 pounds that we used, and in 2015, it's 3.7 pounds. So that's a big increase, and this is a great thing. And now it's even more, because spices have really become popular, very popular, and I'm going to share with you some of my favorites. And so here's just various spices. I will tell you, I just like you. Anybody love all spices? Don't have one that they don't like? Okay. You are unusual, which is great. That's great. But one of them that I don't really like is star anise. It's got that licorice flavor. I also don't really care for fennel. So those are similar in taste. I don't like them. And the third one that I don't like is clove. There was such a big war over cloves when they went to go get them. It's crazy. They actually chopped down the trees because they wanted to increase they wanted to have more demand for cloves, but what they didn't realize was how many years it was going to take for the clove trees to grow back. So they had this gap in between when they didn't have enough production of cloves, and then the desire for cloves went away. So it was kind of an interesting thing that happened with cloves, but that's my third one that I don't really care for. But the interesting thing is it's one of the spices that is in a pumpkin spice blend. So I will put in a little, but it's not one of my favorite spices. I'll use it, but I'm not going crazy for it. Some people love it. There's the nutmeg, the colored peppers, saffron. Saffron has always been expensive. It's always going to be expensive. It is hand harvested from the saffron crocus. Each little stamen is pulled out by hand on like particular mornings where it's cool, generally in Spain and Morocco. This is hard work. So when you are paying, $20 for like a gram of saffron, you're like, why? That's why. So it does tend to be expensive. You don't have to use a lot of it if you use it. It is highly regarded in Indian cooking. It's very, very good for you. And the best way to use saffron is to take like maybe 3, 4, 5 of those little stems or whatever you call them, put them in water and boiling water, pour it over them, and then add it to what you're cooking. So like a beautiful, like if you want to make saffron rice, that's what you do. So you don't just throw the saffron in your rice, you use some of the cooking liquid and let it sit and get really beautifully yellow. Okay, so that's like a really important spice. Allspice. How many people use allspice? Not many, and I have to tell you, I was one of those people who didn't really use it. And then there's a company that I buy spices from called Burlap and Barrel, and they had allspice. And I thought, I'm going to try this because I don't use allspice, but I want to try using it. And it comes as these beautiful berries. They're big. And this is a spice that you can buy ground, but if you take the berries and you grind them, it is such a different thing. And it has a very unusual flavor. And I went to Down to Earth today, and I want to tell you, they have a whole section of bulk herbs and spices, okay? And I want you to remember this, because if you want to go try something like allspice, you can just get like 5 berries and put them in a little bag and pay for those 5 berries. Recently, I went and got cinnamon sticks, And it was like a joyous day. And the reason it was so joyous, it cost me 78 cents for my little bag of cinnamon sticks. And I was like, this is great. That's all I needed right now. So, keep that in mind. And then one that I absolutely love, and you may or may not have had, is sumac. Anybody have sumac? It is lemony. It is delicious. It's one of my very favorite spices. It's the sumac berries. It comes in berries, or you can buy it ground. It is used in Middle Eastern cooking. It is wonderful. White pepper is one of the peppers. Indian black salt. A lot of people use this in their plant-based cooking. I would not include it in spices because it's not really. It has a very eggy kind of smell, sulfury. I don't really care for it that much, but some people like to add it to their mock egg salad when they make like tofu salad. And then paprika. Paprika is just a dried ground pepper, a sweet pepper. In Hungary, which they're known for their paprika, they have sweet paprika and they have hot paprika. So this is a spice that I think is very, what do I want to say? It's kind of maligned because it seems so like you sprinkle it on top of something, but you don't really use it. It's fabulous in chili. If you don't add peppers, you can use this. My husband likes his chili. This is almost funny. He likes his chili with no tomatoes. So I put tomato paste in, and he'll go for a few peppers, but he doesn't really like them in there. So I will add paprika. And paprika comes sweet, hot, and smoked. Anybody use smoked? I love smoked. I love smoked anything, but smoked paprika is the best. Are we using more I don't know exactly why we're using more spices, but more spices is likely due to the fact that people have cut down on, I don't know whether people really have or not, but generally people are concerned about their sodium intake. And you can really boost the flavor of your food with herbs and spices and cut down on how much salt you get. And then maybe it's because the increasing age of the population. Everybody's getting older, even these two over here. Are you getting older? Are you older today than yesterday? Yeah, so we're all getting older. But as our population age increases, we tend to lose some of our taste. And so using herbs and spices may make your food taste better, more flavorful. So there's a whole lot of reasons to do this. And sometimes we're not only adding flavor, look at these, these are just beautiful here. And this is probably, I can't read them, but this is probably paprika and all kinds of spices in an herb market. And these add a lot of color sometimes. Curry powder was made up, okay? Here we buy curry powder. In India, each family, as I understand it, had their own curry powder blend in their family. Your auntie made her own curry powder. So it wasn't like you didn't go to the store and buy it. Now, curry powders can be based on many different things, and there's garam masala, there's all kinds of different spices. But curry powder in this country is usually based on turmeric. Even when you buy it in bulk, I bought curry powder from the same store in Santa Rosa, California for 30 years. 25 years in, they must have switched vendors. And the curry powder that I bought was no longer the curry powder that I used to buy, which was number 378. That's how much curry powder I bought. I knew the code for the curry powder. And then I tasted the curry powder, and I was like, this is not the same. And it wasn't. It was a different blend. And then I bought another curry powder from somewhere else, and it was hot. And what I tend to do is bring my bottle in, have them weigh the bottle, put the curry powder in the bottle, because I don't want more plastic, and then I'd bring it home, and then I'd taste it, and I'd be like, oh, this is hot curry powder. So then what I'd have to do is write on the bottle, hot curry powder. So taste it and know what you're having, or you can make your own blend. If I were going to make a blend, I can pretty much assure you, you would not really find cloves in there, because I don't like cloves. And this is one of the beautiful things about making your own spice blends. You can make it how you like it, and you can call it whatever you like. It's funny, I did a class and I made this, I called it Rancho Gordo's Bean Spice Blend. And this woman contacted me and she said, I want that blend. I said, well, actually, I don't even remember what was in the blend, because that was in the year 2020, and I wasn't selling the blend, so I couldn't tell you, but I'm pretty sure that I had tomato powder in there, and paprika, and probably smoked paprika, and maybe some oregano, and a whole bunch of other things that was going to be like a one-time deal. And you can do that. You can make the thing you want, or you can just take your bottles out and do it. I will encourage you, though, if you take your bottles out and make yourself a little thing that you put into your food, you may want to just pay attention to what you used, so that if you loved it, you could do it again. Okay? So, because you might go, oh, I remember I put in some lemon thyme, some regular thyme, a little bit of oregano, and some dried parsley. And then you're like, oh, what did I really put in there? So just kind of keep track if you're going to do that. But there's so many blends out there, and here's what I'll tell you. If you're not buying your herbs and spices in bulk, you are going to be paying a lot more money than you have to for somebody else to make the blend. Now, I'm not saying you never should buy their blend. If you find one you love, buy it and use it. But if you don't, make your own. Okay, how much you use. Does it matter? Of course it matters. And part of it is, it just depends. Can what you use in your everyday cooking influence your health? Your herbs and spices are going to be your number one source of polyphenols and antioxidants in your diet. They are very concentrated, more than most other things, especially the spices. And I will encourage you to buy organic as much as you can, because a lot of these are like the bark, the roots, the important parts of the plant that may or may not have been sprayed with whatever. So if you can buy organic, buy organic. They really will add to the nutrition that you get. So you can be liberal with them, but just remember, too much is too much, no matter what, okay? And if you, by accident, add too much to something, it's often hard to get it out, especially something that's very, flavor forward, that you're like, oh, that doesn't taste so good. I mean, you can either, if you put it in soup and you're like, oh, that didn't taste good, what you basically have to do is make another batch of soup and put nothing in it and blend them together. Or you toss the soup, which I'm not likely to do. But if, let's say you're using, a teaspoon of something or 2 teaspoons of something, that's a good amount. So feel free to use lots of these things. So this is something that I love to share, this slide, because everybody's always like, what? So this is from, it's from one of the spice companies, actually. A half a teaspoon of oregano leaves has as many antioxidants as 3 cups of spinach. A teaspoon of curry powder has as many antioxidants as a half a cup of grapes, red grapes, which are known for their resveratrol. And a teaspoon of ground cinnamon has as many antioxidants as a half a cup of blueberries, and we know that blueberries are good for you. Is that amazing? I think it's absolutely amazing, because this is not a lot. So if you're making something and you add a half a teaspoon of oregano, look at what you're getting. And curry powder and cinnamon, and this goes for all of them, Okay, so they are amazing sources of antioxidants, polyphenols, all the good stuff you're going to get in your food. Now, cinnamon. How many people like cinnamon? I'm a cinnamon fiend. I almost brought it with me on my trip, okay? But I didn't. So not all cinnamon is the same. This is the important thing. So there's cinnamon verum, which is called true cinnamon or Ceylon cinnamon, and this is the one that you want to use. They say it has a lighter, sweeter flavor than cassia cinnamon, but I don't believe that. And I'm going to tell you from my personal experience, the Ceylon cinnamon was more common in Europe and North America, and now people have shifted to the other, the cassia cinnamon. And the cassia cinnamon has compounds in it. It has high coumarin levels, and the low coumarin is the Ceylon. I use both, okay? The Saigon cinnamon is the cassia cinnamon. And it smells really sweet and rich. And the thing about the Ceylon is it is going to really positively affect your blood sugar much more than the other cinnamon. Now, it's interesting because, okay, that the cassia cinnamon it's more of a bark, and the Ceylon cinnamon is more folds. I got some from a spice company that I've used for many years, and the cassia cinnamon is so, what do I want to say? It's so fragile that I put it in the steel-cut oats, and I'm pulling out pieces of the bark. It didn't work very well. So I use the Ceylon cinnamon in my steel-cut oats. I put in 1 stick, and then it's in there. I also, and I have a little slide with what is there, I also add it on top, okay? So I'm a little bit of a cinnamon fiend, which is okay, because it's not like chocolate, okay? It's a little better for me. Other good-for-you spices. Probably all of them. I don't think there's any bad-for-you spices, so all of them. And do they need to be studied for you to use them? Traditionally, not. Do you know what the first medicines were all herbs and spices? They were not. They did not come from a pharmacy. They came from nature. And that is like, well, I'm just going to give you an example that's not something that you would eat, but like aspirin was made from white willow bark. Okay? So there's a lot of things in nature that are much better for you than necessarily pharmaceuticals. Here's some of them. Cardamom. How many people like cardamom? I love cardamom. My husband doesn't like cardamom, so I don't give him cardamom. And cardamom is another one that I grind. And it's much better to buy the cardamom. You can get the pods. You can get green pods. You can get black pods. You can buy the seed, okay? You don't need to get the pods to get the seed. You can get the seed separately and to grind it when you're going to use it. It is one of the spices that has very volatile oils. And as soon as you grind it, I mean within 2-3 weeks, it no longer has the potency that it did before. So you want to grind it as you use it, kind of the way that you would grind flax, because flax is not something I'm going to talk about, but with flax, you want to grind it as you're going to use it, because it's volatile. Coriander. How many people like coriander? That's the cilantro, right? The seed of the cilantro. I have a friend, she grows cilantro, and sometimes she lets it go to seed, and those seeds are a whole different thing than the ones you buy, because they're kind of fresh and they're fruity. They're delicious. But you can take the seed, the coriander seed, and I buy that in seeds too. You can toast it and grind that and use that. Turmeric, which I'll talk about a little more, and ginger. And these two, the turmeric and the ginger, very, very well studied, and something that you want to include as often as you can, because they are so good for you. But there's so many other spices, and they're all good for you. So ginger root. You can use it fresh or dried, okay? when I travel, before I travel, I make ginger capsules. Ginger is good for motion sickness, okay? I live on the Mendocino coast, and the road going there is like this. And people who move there say, is there another way to get here? And it's like, not unless you have a plane. So either my husband or I, we take the ginger, depending on who's driving. It really does help. I can give you other motion sickness tips, but I won't do that right now. But ginger is really effective for that. There's more than 100 compounds in ginger. And so we don't know exactly what's the thing that's really working best. It can be used for morning sickness if you check with your doctor, who most likely knows zero about this, okay? But it probably does help, and I would tell you, as a dietitian, I probably can tell you this, that you can drink a cup of ginger tea, and it may help you. So anytime you feel like it, you can have a cup of ginger tea. That's very good for you. You can add it to your food, and here's the PubMed reviews. It's for nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, inflammation, metabolic syndromes, which is diabetes, digestive function, and potentially colorectal cancer markers. It can help decrease that. So ginger's been so well studied and used for thousands of years before AD in BC, 1,000 years prior at least. So very well studied and something you can use, and you can use it fresh or dried. And ginger lasts a long time, and there's different ways you can store it fresh. I know of at least 3. You can just use a piece at the end. I put it into my refrigerator. It will last a decent amount of time. Some people like to grate it on your microplane and then freeze it, or you can freeze it whole. Or the other thing is you get a jar of sherry and you put your piece of ginger in. And that lasts. It has a little sherry flavor, but I like to do it just whole, and I always have dried ginger around if I really need ginger and I don't have any, because it works so well. Here's the interesting thing about food. What do we like? We like all of these things: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which is that 5th flavor, which is in shiitake mushrooms, tomato paste, soy sauce, miso, and it's really flavorful. But so do we need salty? Well, salty doesn't have to be from salt per se. It could be from miso. It could be from sumac has a little bit of a salty flavor. It has a sour flavor too. So all of these things, but they don't all need to be there. But there is some bitter in some of the herbs, so that may satisfy that. But adding herbs and spices will add a broadness to your food. So use more sour food to cut your desire for sweet. And I'll just add to that, because I'm a big-time fermenter. If you ferment your food, it goes to sour. And not only is it the sour, but it's how good it is for your gut microbiome. So here are some spices by cuisine, the few ideas that I wanted to share with you so you don't go, she just blabbed about all this stuff, didn't tell us anything. These are some of the spices you can use for Mexican: coriander, cumin, oregano, and I want to mention garlic powder or fresh garlic, cinnamon, chili powder. If you want to do like a mole, you could add some cacao powder. But I do want to mention garlic powder. Dr. Greger recently did a video on garlic powder. And he said using 1/8 of a teaspoon a day, which is like nothing, can change a whole bunch of things for you physically, biologically, and he said it will only cost a few pennies a day. Now here in your environment, I could imagine that garlic powder could get very clumpy. So sometimes if you put white rice in, it will help stop that. But if you buy like pure, and I have to tell you, I broke a spice grinder by putting in a chunk of hard garlic powder. And I probably break more spice grinders than most people. And as I put it in, I thought, this is going to break. And I did it anyway. Luckily, I had a backup, but so you want to be really careful. If you have a Vitamix, you could put it in there. You won't break your Vitamix, but putting in some white rice may help. You can use a mortar and pestle to grind, to get it loosened up. But it is going to clump, because how many people have used fresh garlic? Like probably everybody here, right? And what happens when you use that fresh garlic? It's sticky. And so when you have the garlic powder, which is just ground, it's dried ground garlic, it's going to be sticky. So yeah, mortar and pestle is a great idea. So then Caribbean, they use the allspice, they use nutmeg, they use the garlic, cloves, cinnamon, ginger, and there's one more that they use, which is mace, which is the outside coating of a nutmeg, which isn't used that often in our country. And then I just wanted you to see there's a whole lot, and there's a website called Cook Smart. There's many, many more. And one of the things you can see is in Indian cuisine, there's lots of spices. And we know that from what we've eaten. But we don't always know what's in there. And there's things that we don't use so often, which are, and I saw them out there, curry leaves and coriander, which is the cilantro, and all kinds of things that can be added. But I think it's just interesting to see. And someone did ask me about tarragon. And tarragon can be used in French cuisine. Here's an interesting thing. I told you I don't like those like licorice-y flavors, and tarragon has a little bit of that, and I really like tarragon, and I like to pair it with potatoes. It's very delicious. I put it in a potato salad recipe that I have. So it's very tasty. So just some ideas. I wanted to give you some resources for herbs and spices, but these are some of my resources for herbs and spices. Mountain rose herbs, they're all organic, and what they have at the Down to Earth is Frontier, which is organic. So again, buy in bulk if you can. Burlap and Barrel is not organic, but they're highly curated spices. They are pricey, but they are very, very good, and they're a great company. The Frontier I just told you, Rumi Spice is known for their Middle Eastern spices and their saffron, and it is a company that is run by veterans, because they were over in Afghanistan. So I like that company, and there's many, many, many others. So one of the things that's important is terroir. Terroir is where it's grown. So if you grow turmeric in Hawaii, it's going to be very different than the turmeric grown in Belize. And so you want to pay attention to that. And I bet the ginger grown here is different than the ginger grown in the US or Peru or wherever it's being grown. So keep that in mind, because they're not all going to taste exactly the same. And you can pick and choose where you get your herbs and spices from. Because I've had turmeric from Belize, and it's quite tasty. The turmeric is not well absorbed. And so, do you want to use turmeric or do you want to use curcumin? And I have a friend, and she says, well, I use the curcumin because it's more well absorbed. But did they have this 3,000 years ago? No. So there is something in our microbiome that prevents the turmeric from being absorbed all the time. So I say, if you can, use the turmeric rather than taking any kind of supplement. And I think that's important. Thank you. And also, my email address, if you want to get a hold of me, my website is thevegiequeen.com. And you can get a hold of me there if you want to. And I am open for questions if you have any. Cayenne pepper, what do you want to know about it? It's very hot and spicy and delicious. It's just a pepper that's ground up. So here's the interesting thing about peppers. A cayenne is a particular kind of pepper, and it's just ground up. So like you've probably seen, they now have like these ghost pepper hot sauces. It's just a hotter pepper. So they are on a Scoville scale of like 0 to 5 billion. The cayenne is kind of like weenie. It's kind of down toward the, not so hot side, even though it seems hot. So that is something that contains the capsaicin, which is good for you. And like I said, that nose spray I had cayenne pepper in it. Well, no, once it's clumped up, you need to unclump it. You need to either put it in your spice grinder, or you need to put it in your Vitamix, or you can put it in a mortar and pestle and break it up. Sometimes you need literally a hammer to do that. And if it gets to that point, here's my best advice. Toss it and buy some more, okay? So, here's the thing. If you buy them by the bottle, they tend to be expensive. If you buy them in bulk, they are not that expensive. Even if it says $17 a pound, you're only buying, do you know how much is in those bottles? Usually 1 to 2 ounces. How much do you pay for a bottle of herb, spice, blend? $6, $7? How much is it going to cost? I'm not going to do the math right here, but how much is it going to cost even if that was $30 a pound, which it's not going to be? If it was $30 a pound, you're going to be paying $2 to fill your bottle. Okay? So, and it gives you the opportunity to try more herbs and spices or buy just what you need so your onion powder doesn't get clumped up. So you only buy, 3 teaspoons at a time. So yes, it is more bioavailable when combined with black pepper. It is still not super bioavailable, but it does sometimes help to combine it with black pepper at the same time. If you're doing cooking, oftentimes, because remember, the most used spice is black pepper, so a lot of times people are already doing that, but yes, you can combine it with that. Oh, that's a great question. So she has stevia growing in her planter box. You are going to be using the best form of stevia because the white powder you get is very, very processed. So when I taught a class called Alternatives to Traditional Baking, and the first stevia was green. And it was very light, and you'd open the jar, and I'd bring it into my class. I'd have it all over my lips. I'd go, oh, that is so sweet. So as the leaves, you could take the leaves and you could add them to like your cup of tea, like just one little leaf at a time. And then you could, if you wanted, you could dry it and then you could powder it. But it is it's a very flyaway kind of spice. So it's something, why did you grow it?
I just like the taste.
Okay, so yeah, you can just add it to whatever you want to sweeten, and it's going to be much better for you than any of the powders. Well, I mean, that's why if you're growing it, you could just put a leaf in your tea. You could dry it and do it that way. But once you start grinding it, it's very light, and so it starts doing a fly. No, the stevia. But sugar cane is not super sweet because it's whole and it has everything in it. But, we don't eat sugar cane. Yeah, so essential oils can be very, very good to use. They're slightly different than using the whole herb or spice. But yes, you can use those. And if they're edible oils, you can put them into your food. I have to tell you a funny story. I was in that middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania with Dr. Greger, and I suddenly got this really bad tummy ache. And there was someone with essential oils, and I said, oh, I don't feel that good. And she said, here, have 2 drops of peppermint oil. And I had it, and I have to tell you, within, minutes, I started to feel way better. So yes, essential oils are good as long as they're edible oils. And you have to get really high quality essential oils if you're going to use them in that way. But yes, but if I had some mint there, I probably just could have chewed a few leaves of mint and been fine too. The oregano I grow is like a plant with leaves, like about this big. Well, like if I'm making chili, or I'm making a soup, I'll just cut off some of the fresh and I'll put it in, or I'll just cut it up and add it at the end. oregano is kind of spicy in a way, but not spicy, but it has a certain flavor. Here's the beautiful thing about fresh herbs. If you go over to a fresh herb and you rub the leaves, the essential oils are all there, and you can smell it. You can taste it. You can say, oh, I don't like this, or I do like that. And so if you can grow any herbs, that's the best thing to do. How many people have ever bought herbs, and you bring it home, and you have this whole bunch, and you don't get to use it all before it's bad? It's spoiled. The nice thing about growing your own is you can just snip off 3, sprigs, and you have what you want. So I highly encourage you to grow whatever herbs you. Well, here's the whole thing. If you open your 5-year-old spices, now part of it depends on how you have them stored and what they are. So sometimes if you have them stored just the right way and you never open the jar, they could still be okay. So what you want to do is you want to take your spices and your herbs especially and just kind of like squish them between your fingers, smell, and if you smell nothing, buy, but don't throw away the jar because you can bring it to the store and refill it, okay? And that's like the only time that I will buy a jar is if I don't have a jar. But I have lots of extra spice jars. Yeah, that's the way you can tell. Just like literally one day when you have nothing to do, or set aside, 20 minutes and say, I'm going to go through these 10 bottles. Just see, because if they're there and they're nothing, what do you need them for anyway? But if you have fresh herbs and spices and you go, I discovered I really love adding, coriander to my food, you can. If you have coriander's a seed. So I didn't tell you this, but the seeds will last almost indefinitely before they are ground. So fenugreek, cardamom, coriander, cumin, mustard is one of them. And it's very good for you. Before they're ground, they will stay fresh for like a long time. So anything that you can get that, like allspice, it's going to be good for years. But it's the ground spices and the dried herbs that are going to kind of go off. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And aloha.
Thank you so much, Jill Nussinow, for this amazing presentation. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. Mahalo.